Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our kickoff event for the e-course Climate Resilient Solutions to Hydro Mini-Grids. We are very glad to have you join this course and join the live session today. We'll move right into it. So we're going to tell you a little bit about who we are, and then our initiative called SEEED, Social Enterprise for Energy, Ecological and Economic Development, which this course is a part of. And then we'll give you an overview, a little bit more of an overview than you saw in the course social media outreach page. As well as, this is going to be the core section of this live session, we have a very special opportunity to speak with a speaker that's very experienced in this topic of the water, energy, food, forest, livelihoods section, nexus, and the role that Indigenous communities play. We will introduce the speaker shortly. And then we will give you a chance to learn about the e-learning platform where you will access the course this week, as well as a chance to ask any questions. Okay, so yeah, we have persons from 20 countries signed up for the course, and normally most of our exchange events prior to the pandemic happened in the field, where at least there would be 1 or 2 visits to a place like this. You can see the microhydro project and the community, but we're not able to do that. However, at the same time, doing e-learning platform means we have, you know, people from anywhere can join, and many persons. So for this course, we have over 50 participants. You can see the breakup of whether their organization is local, national, or international, as well as what kind of stakeholders, and the gender breakup. So just to give you an idea of who else is in this cohort, and we just finished actually a 6-week course that had 200 people joining, and it was the fundamentals of community hydro. And it was a 6-week period, so we could do interactive or a bit more engagement. People who joined by the end, especially during the live sessions, knew who else were there. We don't have as much time for this course, but we will find ways we want to hear from you, as well as give you an opportunity to access the course material. So there's this session, and there will be another live session at the end of the week to do that. What is the Hydro Empowerment Network, and what do we do? We focus on knowledge exchange, advocacy around the multi-thematic elements that are required to do community scale hydro, including technical aspects, technical capacity building, socio and environmental and economic aspects, as well as the policy and financing to enable projects. We are a multi-actor network, so we have various types of organizations and individuals. But our core focus is really enabling local practitioners, because without them, there's no way to make projects happen. We started in the Asia Pacific, but we also now engage with practitioners in Sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America. So we have a team behind us that's been doing the SEEED Accelerator and supporting various aspects, and we just want to say thank you for joining the course and getting to know our network. And we are hosted by an organization in Malaysia called Energy Action Partners. So if you'd like to know a little bit more about our work in visual form, since we can't take you to the ground, this 4-minute video is a nice has a nice overview of what community hydro is like and some of our activities, you can find it at our Twitter page, HPNET Hydro. So for some of you, based on the registration forms, you're new to this sector, so we just want to explain the basic components. Some of you just came out of the 6-week course, so you can present this slide instead of me. But to give a brief overview for those who aren't as familiar, we look at community hydro in these elements. We start by looking at the watershed as the foundational element, that this is where the water is sourced from. And then it's routed through some minimal civil construction infrastructure, civil structures, such as a weir, a channel, 4-bay tank, and then there's a penstock pipeline that takes the water into the turbine connected to a generator. When the water has the turbine spinning, the generator also starts to produce electricity, and that is routed to the house for household use as well as productive end use. And in some cases, it's sold to the utility or other distributors that are connected to the larger national grid or main grid. Our network is about 9 years old. It's hard to believe. And over the course of this time, we've learned what has happened, especially in the Asia, actually all of these regions now, we have a good idea, and Latin America, how practitioners have developed over time. And there's a lot of good hindsight that we have gained. And one thing is very clear, that of all the different renewable energy, decentralized renewable energy technologies, there's value add to community hydro that isn't found in the others. Of course, I have a bias on this, but I've also I also still support biomass gasifiers and PV pumping, these kind of things. But in factual terms as well, if you look at the characteristics, community scale hydro, when you have designed and implemented the project successfully, there will be 24/7 electricity generation. Most of the system can be built locally, except for parts that are off the shelf, like the generator and bearings, etc. So you tend to have the local manufacturing helps also to reduce costs, to increase reliability. And in general, because there is no battery storage required, the cost is much less than PV battery systems. There's also a mechanical shaft advantage, depending on where your powerhouse is based. You can actually run a mill. And in fact, in places like Nepal, that the sector started from mechanically run water mills. And then what we are going to focus on this course is that community hydro is so intrinsically connected to community and their land. And in the case of where community hydro projects are based, which are usually hilly forested regions or high altitude hilly regions, there's a great reliance on watersheds. And so in today's scenario of climate change happening, this is a huge advantage because we can actually address both climate resilience, energy access, and so including economic resilience as well, because the type of electricity that's produced allows you to run various productive end uses, motorized loads, which, for example, would be very expensive to run on a PV battery mini grid. And so based on all of this and the hindsight lessons, we realized there were certain factors for sustainability. And one thing to realize is that these projects are typically very remote. As you will probably hear from our speaker today, like getting to these projects, yeah, takes sometimes days, includes lots of walking. And so this is why we depend on local practitioners, and and so the factors that for sustainability need to be looked at in terms of that local practitioner. I won't go into these in detail, but the first module of the course, you will learn more. So the basis behind the SEEED Accelerator is that we realize that in many countries, especially those that had large, well, I won't generalize right now, but in many places, projects were only providing electricity at certain hours of the day. The community saw it as a social asset that they owned collectively, and that's really wonderful. But the community often does not see the project as an enterprise, where if you have 24/7 electricity generation, one would want to be able to sell or use that electricity as much as possible. But often what happens is that system is only run in the evenings. There isn't enough tariff collection because people aren't able to use it more than for household lighting. And so eventually when the grid arrives, which often does, the community, those projects that are working well have been maintained, usually get used in parallel. Projects that are used in an enterprise-based way actually don't get abandoned when the grid arrives. So by the enterprise approach, we mean a social enterprise approach where the hydro mini grid is run as an enterprise. So the community actually, the governing body focuses on generating income for that mini grid. And that happens with the community running their own productive end use enterprises, which use the electricity and are able to pay for electricity at decent rates. And this also allows subsidizing household tariff. And we have seen in places such as Myanmar, Afghanistan, where there was very little government support, this is how projects happened because they didn't have access to funding. And we see that in many places that did have extensive funding from the get-go, grant-based, this happened later on or is still trying to happen. So SEEED, the foundation, comes from making sure that systems are actually sustainable, because many times they run into issues soon after implementation. And in this way, we have both the energy development and the economic development locally. And so overall, the mission or the goal of SEEED is to make sure the hydro mini grid is running along and there is socioeconomic impact. And also, as I'll mention in just a little bit, that there is something that happens in the village that goes beyond kilowatts. There's empowerment beyond kilowatts. There are a number of elements to SEEED, and the core element, as I mentioned earlier, are sustainable watersheds. And in parallel, the other, well, I'll give you a few images from our member in Orissa that has been working on spring shed restoration. Yeah, basically, and this is what you will learn about some of these things in the course, what kind of methods can help to restore the watershed that sources the water for the system. In addition to watersheds, we need reliable technology, and that really depends on local capacity building, local innovation. And then once we have those two elements, we can, okay, sorry. Yeah, so we have various training centers in the region that help on the technical capacity building. And yeah, I mean, there's lots, we can try to cover some of this perhaps in the conversation with the speaker. Once you have reliable technology and sustainable watersheds, we can start to look at productive end use. I mean, if the technology is not reliable, if the water source is not reliable, community cannot think of doing productive end use, which is so important for that enterprise-based approach, right? And examples of this include, for instance, this is a self-financed 80 kilowatt system in Myanmar that has various productive end uses. It started as a 30 kilowatt system, providing electricity to 5 communities. And then as they generated profit from various productive end use, they upgraded to 80 kilowatt. And a year ago, they've upgraded to 300 kilowatt. So yeah, this is because the system works consistently. And there is a proper utility, a community hydro utility with shareholders that collects tariff, etc. They actually have transformers on this system. And so once all of these things happen, productive end use, and it's run as a social enterprise, we can look at what other social and other aspirations can the community meet beyond electricity. In Pakistan, there is a strong focus on involving women in their program. This is the work of the Aga Khan Rural Support Program. Women are actual shareholders, and all the productive end use activities are also very much having women lead in the process. So this is an example of what we mean by empowerment beyond kilowatts. So these are the seed elements, and there are other things like, that impact whether a project remains only as a social asset or does it become a social enterprise. And some of that relates to what kind of finance is it. If there's an interest subsidy or capital cost subsidy or total grant. We can see from different examples in different regions what relates to what kind of model. And then there are various actors for accessing finance. And yeah, in future courses, we will probably go deeper into these things. And finally, there's this aspect of planning. Like 30, 40 years ago, these systems were done in isolated forms, but now with the grid arriving fast, there's a need to work with national government to plan where mini grid systems go, where the grid goes, where both can benefit from each other. And there are some contexts that are doing this already. So these are the key takeaways that, actually, we haven't covered all of these in this talk, but there is, due to the local manufacturing advantage, there is a strong element of job creation, livelihood building. What this course will focus on is the eco-restoration part, and then various benefits that come beyond electricity. And how do we do this? So the SEEED Accelerator first collates the various different best practices from different countries and subregions, and we try to understand what has worked and not worked. And then we ground truth, like who is doing this work right now, who is involved, what are the challenges they are facing, and we facilitate exchange. Earlier, we've done exchanges such as practice to policy. Currently, we are focusing more, we have a more knowledge exchange focus within SEEED. And so we're offering these e-course trainings, but also after these group online trainings, we want to strategize with persons in different countries who want to continue further. We want to support local practitioners in making projects happen. So that is the next step of the accelerator. And part of that will include advocating for the sector in their countries, understanding who are the donors, why are they not funding the sector, and what can we do as a network to change that. The accelerator, we've had different modules supported by different small grants, and we're very grateful for these organizations. They actually joined our kickoff for the 6-week course. There's a recording of it on our YouTube channel, and it's great to see everyone is extremely passionate about community hydro, because we would say that in the last 10-15 years, the focus has shifted a lot towards PV, and it's good to see some support coming to our sector. So finally, for the course overview, there's a typo on this slide, sorry for that. So we start with the role of watersheds. When we talk about climate resilience, as I mentioned, watersheds are fundamental. And within this, we also focus on the role of Indigenous knowledge, because those are the people who have lived and know the terrain and their resources, and who will also develop their own community hydro system. Then the second core part of the course focuses on the watershed management process. Different communities will do this differently, will vary, but we give one example of a watershed management process. What are the phases of it? And then we dive deeper into the first phase of baseline assessment, which is, all of the other phases rely on this. And then finally, we really wanted to give you, especially for microhydro practitioners who have not done watershed strengthening or conservation type work, it's new. And I mean, I fall into that category. And so I really wanted, we want to go beyond just the processes of how a community makes watershed management happen, which is covered in this second portion. But in this final portion, we give examples of different types of treatments that can be done to a watershed area for the benefits that we seek. So there are subsections to each of these, which we're not showing here, but soon you will see that on the e-learning platform. So we would like to now move into the panel portion of our course, and we're focusing on this theme of building inclusive and proven climate resilience. And we are very, very glad to have with us someone who has spearheaded community hydro in Malaysia and supporting various other contexts. He is the Honorable Adrian Banie Lasimbang. Adrian served as the senator for the national government of Malaysia for the state of Sabah from 2018 to 2021. And he has extensive experience on all of these things that I just shared. In fact, he is one of our board members, and it is through our board meetings and exchanges that we realized the hindsight lessons and established the SEEED Accelerator. And he is has been the executive director of TONIBUNG, one of the champion organization leading community scale hydro in Malaysia. And it's an organization that works in conjunction with an Indigenous peoples organization, the Indigenous Peoples Network of Malaysia, which also Banie serves. We affectionately call Adrian Banie. So Banie serves on the board of that, or actually as an advisor. And then what we look forward to hearing about today from Banie is also the Right Energy Partnership, which is, well, we'll learn more, but yes, and Banie also holds a master's in sustainable development from the Jeffrey Sachs Center of Sustainable Development in Malaysia. We are very glad to have him here, and I did not mention CREATE, but CREATE is the training center of TONIBUNG. We had our first gathering of HPNET at CREATE nearly 9 years ago. One of the pictures that I showed on the technical capacity building centers was from CREATE, and every time I visited CREATE, there's extensive innovation that happens, and very local actors are involved, actors from the community who are designing new ways to build turbine aspects in more efficient ways, and not just micro hydro, but various solutions for rural development. And the powerhouse behind all of that is Banie. So we're very glad to have him here, and I haven't spoken to him in ages, so I look forward to this conversation. Yeah. So I'm going to stop sharing slides, and we will do a dialogue with Banie. First, we'll give him a chance to share, and then I will introduce you to my colleague, and we will do a stream side chat type of dialogue with Banie. Hello, Banie. Yeah, yes, I think it's not, is it not?
Okay, now. So Deepti, hello, how are you? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Banie. Sorry about that.
Yeah, it was a wonderful day, and actually after hearing your sharing, I was very excited, and hopefully everything have been going well with this training.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Banie. Yeah, we know you have various things going on, Banie, and we wanted to give you this opportunity to share the latest. I mean, so many things are changing so fast with climate change and the pandemic and how different organizations work. So yeah, we want to give the floor to you.
Yeah, actually, I don't know where to start because there's so many things to share. But I think for the purpose of the discussion, especially with regards to watershed, is important to note that, just to share that when we first started our program to do microhydro about 20 years ago, we never thought like watershed is so important and fundamental to the whole thing, because we thought that microhydro is all about electrification, lighting up villages, and we focus so much on the technology and how it's been deployed. But eventually we found that it's actually so important that the community have to come together and basically enhance their role as custodian of the forest, as a watershed, and so on. So in our case in Malaysia, when we first started, we thought that, okay, we want to come there and do this project. But eventually what we realized is there is no way we can sustain the microhydro without any watershed conservation. Because within that watershed, we still talk about economic empowerment, and when you talk to the communities, all the economic sources that actually comes from the community, it comes from the forest. And water is also very important, because it's not just about water to run your turbine, but everyday life they also have to use water for irrigation. And these are so important, because without watershed water resource management, there'll be conflict. So we have to do a lot of consultation and processes along the way. And one of the things that really we found eventually throughout our experience deploying all this microhydro is, it's easier to get funding through conservation grants. So when especially Malaysia, where we now considered to be a middle income country, many of the funding or grants that used to be available for development countries, we are no longer have access to it. So we really have to innovate on how to fund infrastructure, because infrastructure normally is the government's role to roll out to the communities. So what we have done is like a lot of the project is tied in very much to the watershed conservation, biodiversity conservation, and also some to extend traditional knowledge of forests. So many of our projects eventually becomes like, microhydro is an incentive for the community to protect the watershed. And in the process, we gain more and more skills and also experience in terms of what are the processes that is important for protection of the watershed. So in our case, in Sabah, we have used extensively the native rights an enactment. We have enactment and native law systems in Sabah, and we have used these native law systems to basically provide protection for watershed, because there's also a lot of pressure outside for logging and expansion of oil palm coming into the community. So there has to be some sort of official protection for this community watershed. So what we do is, like, we try to use what we call Tagal System. Tagal System is actually a traditional resource management practices that is being recognized by the government, that have been practiced by indigenous communities for many generations. They have the right to have open and close season for certain resources. So we also try to apply the same concept for watershed area. So we have a totally protected area, and where the community actually declare that area to be a Tagal area. So we use that system. So we can use this traditional knowledge that is already existing in many communities to basically enhance the conservation of this area. So it's just that we need to provide the community a little bit of experience and also tools in order for them to document the process. So in this case, we provide them community mapping as one of the basic tools. We train them how to use the GPS, and they go around the watershed and document what are the important resources inside the watershed that needs to be protected. And all of this knowledge is later on compiled into what we call a community protocol. And the community protocol is basically endorsed by the headman, and all the community come together and they do a ritual that, to ensure that everybody now understand that this area is already protected, and whoever caught encroaching can be penalized by 1 buffalo or 1 pig, or all those different kind of rules that they will impose. And in the same time, they will get to be empowered to also do monitoring. So if they caught anyone outside from the community encroaching to the area, they have the authority to arrest and bring them to the native court to have trial for these encroachers. So we have used a lot of this system in about 40 of the microhydro that we have done in Sabah, Sarawak, and Borneo. So yeah, this is one of the things that, and I think it's also important that eventually the realization of actually the engineering, the actual engineering is only 10% of the whole project. 90% is actually social engineering, and a lot of work is actually needed to provide empowerment for the community, not just economically, but there's also ability for them to manage and also operate the system safely and sustainably. So that's why at CREATE, it is not just a center where we do all this R&D, but it provides a platform for local operators, communities to come, and we train those operators to a level of competency to run those systems. So in any case, there's problem with troubleshooting, they'll be able to do all those independently without needing our services all the time. So it's very important to have that element, because otherwise TONIBUNG will be like overstretched to really manage all those systems everywhere. So this is some of the model, community-based model that we have been championing and promoting, and hopefully this kind of a model can be adopted in a wider range by having government's recognition. We have been trying to advocate for this for a number of years, but there's still a gap that we need to address, particularly with regards to policies that allowing communities to own and manage mini grids. So I'm not sure with other countries, but in Malaysia, it has a total monopoly. The state have total monopoly of generation and distribution of power. So this is one of the biggest stumbling block for communities to able to own set up and own this hydro mini grid systems. So I just want to move to the next thing, which is the Right Energy Partnership. Right Energy Partnership is actually an initiative initiated by the IPMG, the Indigenous Peoples Major Group in the UN SDG. So you know that in the SDG there's like 17 goals to be achieved. But one of the things that that is very important for many indigenous communities is I think goal number 7, which is access to affordable energy. Because I think there's still millions of people have no basic access to electricity, and majority of those are indigenous communities. And these are so important that energy can address many issues like poverty, and climate change and so on. So that's why the IPMG have set up this Right Energy Partnership. But the core function of the REP is to promote rights-based approach, because many of the renewable energy projects, big-scale energy projects, have failed to address, or even it creates a lot of problem in indigenous communities. For example, in Sarawak, all these big dams have been planned, and some have already been built in the name of renewable energy, climate change work, but actually without really putting emphasis on how to make sure that the people's rights are also respected. So REP basically wants to promote that any renewable energy systems, whether it's big or small, it has to respect rights of the people. So it's rights-based approach, and it's not just on their rights related to what is going to be involved in the project, but energy poverty, and also these are also energy is actually rights for every people. So it's one of the core basics of life nowadays. So electricity should be is same par with water, which is rights to life, and these are something that we have to work towards. But unfortunately, many communities, especially indigenous communities, have no access to this. So I was talking earlier because indigenous communities can, and they have the ability to own their own system. So this is some of the things that REP is trying to bridge the gap, so that funding is available for communities will have the capability and the willingness to actually work towards establishing their own system. So these are kind of things that we are supporting and under the REP program. So just to backtrack a bit, the REP is Indigenous Peoples led. So I'm one of the board member of REP. There are a few other from all over the continents, but we are a multi-stakeholder part. We are establishing multi-stakeholder partnership by increasing renewable energy systems that respect human rights, and also to leverage on the existing expertise and leadership of indigenous leaders or organization in many countries. And then we are looking at also establishing certain safeguards and protocols to ensure that the rights of the people is also recognized and also protected. So I think the Watershed protocol that I was sharing earlier is actually one of the things that we're trying to promote, so that the project or whatever program that we are funding is not just about building the capacity and empowerment of the people, but also provide some sort of protection towards the indigenous people's rights. So I think I'll stop here first, and maybe you have more discussion and question for me, which we can or even the from our audience can also ask question. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, Banie, that's a really excellent overview of why this topic is important. And yeah, we would love to hear more. I just want to introduce Lara, who I didn't introduce properly. Lara Powell is our thematic coordinator for social and economic and environment topics, and she is going to join me in this dialogue with us, Banie. So Hi, Lara.
Thank you. Hi. Hello.
Actually, yeah, and the reason I really wanted Lara to join is that she has been supporting various local organizations, but also focusing on energy access and Indigenous communities and what we can take from the processes. So yeah, first thing, Banie, we are wondering what kind of change are you seeing in the communities for when you, I mean, if any, is there climate change impact happening in the communities you work in? And what, if so, what, how have they been coping with it? I think it's muted again, Banie. Yeah. Oops, sorry, once more, I think, to unmute. It's okay, here we go.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you are practicing total control. It is a good practice. Hi, Lara. Nice to see you after a long time because of COVID. Everybody's have not been seeing each other. But going back to the question posed by Deepti, I think changes are really is very clear that especially with regards to weather patterns, and we have seen many of communities have suffered in terms of the change of climate. For example, last few months, I think the last year, we had so much rain that we had, many of our communities with hydro have experienced either total meltdown or total failure of the system because of huge floods, which they have not seen in many years. Or even a lot of them have said that this is the first time in their lifetime they have seen such huge floods, apparently. So it is something that is people in the community do observe, that there's a significant or drastic change in the weather patterns. The rain have been extremely from zero into like too much, like the variation is too big. And then few years back there was extreme long drought, which many communities have suffered, which they need to shut down their operations of the micro hydro. But I have to note here that certain communities that have protected their forests properly did not suffer that much compared to those who had some sort of disturbance in their watershed area. And I can use, for example, in Kampung Tiku, if you go to in Ulupapar in Sabah, we have 6 micro hydro still operation there. But for example, like Tiku, they are one of the better managed watershed. Can clearly say that, and then they're even proudly saying that, oh, our watershed performs better than the other 2 villages, because even after 3 months no rain, they still have the system still can run, compared to those who already like have shut down like 2-3 months ago. So these are something that is changing, and even for us in Tonibung, we have to devise different kind of management system to cater for those changes in the communities. For example, like during lower period, we have a lower flow. We really have to put emphasis on load management, because sometimes when people already get used to having power, they are very reluctant to reduce their usage. These are some of the problem, and we have to somehow work towards finding the technology to facilitate those.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really great to hear that that you do see a difference, and the community perceives a difference between the watershed that is healthier and that those that not. Yeah, because one question we often get is, how long does it take, like after doing the watershed treatment, how fast? I know this depends on the methods, but yeah, I mean, it sounds like you are seeing a difference in forest that's already there, and then in places where the forest has degenerated, and it takes time for things to return. Microhydro practitioners who have to convince communities, those who are not enlightened, or maybe just, you know, like other priorities took over and they have not taken care of the watershed. When you start working on that watershed, does it usually take a number of years for the impact to show?
Yeah, it depends on the severity of the issue, actually, and also the size of the watershed we are dealing with. For example, like my first experience dealing with this was Long Lawan in Sarawak, where we built this microhydro in 2001, but we didn't realize that down the road there were some logging activities, because that area is quite active logging in Sarawak. So eventually some encroachment went into the village, to the watershed area, without the knowledge of the community. And only later they discovered that, you know, suddenly the turbine becomes having problem that got damaged, because there's more silt coming into the turbine, and it basically eroded the blades of the turbine without them knowing what was the problem. Then they realized that actually there's more sand coming into the system, but when by the time they discovered it, it's a bit too late, because it took another 5-6 years after the logging stopped for the river to recover. So these are like long-term things that we need to do. But if we have thought it earlier, that by setting up a watershed monitoring system, we could have prevented it, you know. But as I said earlier, a lot of this watershed conservation and work that we eventually built into the microhydro project was an afterthought, because all the first few projects that we did was purely on, you know, electrification project, and we never thought that these are so important.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think this might relate to the next question we had in mind, which was whether there are any barriers to effective watershed management and community hydro that you've experienced, and how you might overcome barriers.
Yeah, of course, barriers. There are two types of barriers. First, barriers within the community. Most of the time, barriers within community are related to land rights, because you know, this watershed, there are some families who already own that area, customarily, their customary rights area. So then there have to be some number of steps that we need to do to facilitate the discussion within the community and the family who owns land in that watershed. But it can be done, because eventually, when the microhydro already start and the families are also beneficiary of microhydro, they can see the importance of you know, getting this area to be protected. But the other barrier is actually the government, because in many cases, at least in my case in Borneo, there is a conflict of who has the authority to actually declare an area as protected area, because sometimes the government want to issue licenses, logging license in the particular area, and while the community wants to protect it, because they need the watershed to be protected from no encroachment and so on. So the same project that I was talking about in Long Lawan had this problem, because even though the community said, okay, this area is pemakai menua or the communal area of the community, but the local government still issued a logging license on top of that area, which eventually resulted in this encroachment and degradation of some part of the watershed. But luckily, because of the micro hydro and the mapping process that we did, there was a negotiation or the dialogue happened with the government, and eventually they realized that it is important for the community. So in the end, the government or forestry did cancel the particular license for that area, but some of it is already too late. So I think it is something to do with the internal factor and also external, but I think the internal community is much more easier to facilitate compared to the government or the conflict with outsiders.
Yeah, that's very good to know how the community can overcome those situations and negotiate, and if there's effort put in, there can be a good solution. The other external stakeholders are these international policies. Like, well, one thing I want to mention to the audience is that you can access Banie's work through his social media. And I know that on Facebook and LinkedIn, and it's amazing to see what is happening at Create through that. But I've seen, Banie, recently you have been posting about the REDD situation and, like donors. And I mean, so the overall question is, how do we get donors to bridge energy access and conservation restoration type work, which it sounds like in your case you've had good success in doing, but also how do policies like REDD and or maybe other kind of larger scale programs, how can they include some of the work that we want to see happen?
You pose a very what I said nowadays a contagious question about where the money should be spent, where funding should be channeled, and should it be accessible to indigenous communities. So of course for us in REP, these are the exact question that we want to provide, because if you allow, you leave it to the communities, small communities, for them to go and find this money for them, I think they are too small for this big funding agency. So there is a need for someone or a program to bridge this gap. So that's why REP as an international program is here to actually facilitate those, so that money from all this REDD or even nowadays carbon trading and can be channeled to like the actual projects. And many of this project internationally, sometimes we don't even know whether it really goes to the actual project, or it's just paying consultants to do research and over and over again. So at least with REP, for example, or even HPNET, can be the bridge to address this gap, so that community that have the ability and the will to produce or want to set up mini grids can have access to this funding. But coming back to that question about how this climate financing should be channeled, I think there are a lot of dialogue whether should it go to a project. But our goal is we want those money to go to actual projects and not just like for show only projects, you see. So we have to do a little bit of work, lobbying on how the money should be spent, and secondly to also reach out to these communities through our partners, local partners in the national level, so that we have those information. So the moment we have this information, we can compile it into a program that we can bring it to the climate finance financing. And there's a lot of things happen after Glasgow. I mean, Glasgow is actually a point where all of those programs, mechanism that was like developed throughout the years, and how many COPs, finally it is being operationalized. And for us, this is a good opportunity to tap into that new mechanism that was signed in Glasgow. But unfortunately, not many people know how this system works, and it's so technical that many of the indigenous communities will never ever have the capacity to actually access to it. So that's why we need intermediary programs to facilitate those.
Yes, REP sounds so promising, because the organization is made up of indigenous peoples organizations and persons, and that some intermediaries are not still outsiders, but with REP you're actually part of that community that's on the ground. So I think I hope it will have a huge impact. Yeah, I'm just reading the question asked. Well, actually, we have a few more questions, and then we will go to the audience questions. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, Banie, I think you actually addressed this question we had in mind earlier, but we're wondering about any insights on interweaving traditional knowledge or indigenous knowledge with like Western science and technology in community scale hydro and watershed management. And I know you spoke about Tagal, and but maybe you could expand a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, Lara. It was a very enlightening experience for us to actually try out this. I'm not an expert on traditional knowledge, but being an indigenous person myself, I know some of those practices that have been practiced throughout in our communities for many, many generations. But normally it was not particularly used for forest conservation. But the concept of use and protect is actually very important for indigenous communities. So this is one of the things that why we brought it up, because I think the most important part is even though you want to protect that particular area, you must also remember that by doing the protection, it will not lose the ability of the forest to serve the community. That's very important. If you do a Western style of management, which is totally protected, it's like, the Yellowstone model, where leave nothing but footprints, take nothing but photograph, which is actually very bad for the environment, because the interaction of human and the forest actually is one of the reasons why we have a lot of biodiversity. I mean, for me, coming from Borneo, we have like one of the mega diverse countries in the world. It's a way of life, interaction with the nature. So I think these are something that we have to really pay attention to, and it's not as simple as just fencing the whole area. So secondly, the traditional knowledge of conservation, concept of use and protect, is also important, because we have to minimize conflict, because initially one of the stumbling block that when we want to establish a protection over this area, normally the family or the clan who owns land on the watershed will be penalized for having land there. Is unfair. So the rest of the community, there has to be a collective responsibility towards that. So how do we do that processes? And maybe one of the things that we have tried is to look at what is allowable and not allowed to be done in the watershed, so that the whoever owns that area still can basically live off the land or the resources. So those are things that we need to facilitate. We have done a lot of community watershed conservation workshops. We have done community mapping. Those are some of the tools and practices that we can use to basically draw up the the management plan, which is like modern style management plan, but the knowledge and also the know-how is actually traditional.
Yeah, this is so excellent to hear, Banie, everything you've shared. But when developing this module, it was, you know, our team included local and Western-based persons. So even terminology and like steps and yeah, we realized like there's no one way of doing things, but it's important to realize what has been done for generations first before bringing in a new method. So yeah.
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 Any more questions?
Yeah. Yes, actually, it's somewhat related, and I think you also touched on it, but we were wondering about how to ensure Indigenous rights and leadership are at the forefront, you know, of community hydro, but of rural electrification more broadly.
Yeah, I mean, Lara, when it comes to making decision, we always wary about the importance of the local champions. So any projects that we want to do, there has to be a local champion in the committee, and the process has to be done together in participatory way in all the stages. So that's why it's so important to have community engagement. And for us, in REP, one of the things that we really want any projects to be done is through the free prior informed consent process. And free prior informed consent is just a concept, but it's a requirement currently that been I think been now currently been imposed to any climate related mitigation or climate solutions, because it's so important that the people in the area or the owner of the land is consulted properly. So having free prior consent is in the forefront of the process. It will allow leadership from the communities to really have meaningful and also effective participation in getting the consent, and maybe opening up for collaboration and partnership along the way. So this is what we hope to achieve, so that any projects that we want to implement in indigenous territories has to confirm or respect a free prior informed consent. So yeah, these are just one step of doing it right, and the rest is like empowerment and providing the room for feedback and so on is also a process that requires create the process to be participated by leaders.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's so important. I know in Canada anyways, there's a lot of energy projects where there's consultation, but they skip over the consent part. So the whole free prior and informed, it's important.
They remove the free.
Yeah.
Normally they will remove, they only want prior informed, whether you say no or not.
Yeah, it's after the fact, or yeah, that's a very important point.
Yeah, and one other question we had come from someone is, how do we encourage, well, in the module, there is a section on stakeholders and the role of women. And yeah, we're wondering if, I mean, usually in indigenous cultures, women have a very strong role. But if there are communities where that's not part of the tradition, yeah, I mean, basically your thoughts on how involving women support all the processes we've been talking about, and if, yeah, how to make that happen.
Yeah, thank you, Dipti, because gender perspective in this project are so important. And I got like real first-hand experience on when we don't put, you just go with the flow, and we don't consciously put requirement for better participation of women. We end up losing, or the project not going according to what we planned for. For example, in Long Lawan, where those days, this is one of our first project, because we are so focused on just providing electricity, consultation, and getting feedback is not really high in the agenda. But when we started to lay out the cables to the longhouse, we never had any opportunity to actually engage with the women's group, and all the meeting is just held. They're held in the Ruai with all the men. So when we already consult, the men said, because they want fast and easy, they just put the cable out in the front of the porch of the house, and all the house is actually in the long house. You go all the back. But then when we started to do wirings, actually most of the use of the power is in the kitchen. So now we had to like spend so much money to pull wires from the front all the way back to the house. So it actually exploded our budget, because why we didn't just pull the cable from the kitchen or from the back all the way down there? So because we didn't put emphasis on consulting the women, because what do you want to use the energy for? I said, oh, you want washing machine, you want this, you want that. Said, everything is in the kitchen. And the man said the reason why they want wood, so that they can watch TV in the front. So that is just one like simple, funny, but true example of how consultation and having all the peoples to be consulted matters most. But one of the things that after 40 projects that we have implemented throughout Malaysia, I can say like 90% of the successful projects are managed by women. So it's just that women have better tendency and more meticulous in terms of record keeping, and they're more disciplined in terms of spending money. Well, the men normally just spend stuff, buy things, but they don't keep the record. And in the end, when you have bad records, people start losing confidence on your management, and they stop paying the fees or the monthly dues. So when that happened, then the whole system collapsed. So as simple as good record keeping, transparent in terms of how the money is being spent, and much more discipline in terms of using the money. It makes a lot of difference. And last but not least, after halfway of our work, we started to spend more time looking at productive end use, because we thought like providing them electricity, things will automatically unfold. But it doesn't, because a lot of the time when this community we electrify, they are either hunter-gatherers or subsistence farmers. They are not, their enterprise is something new. It's totally alien to them. So we really have to put some emphasis on providing trainings and so capacity building in terms of productive end use. And who else is the best group to be empowered is the women, because they are the ones staying in the longhouse in the kampung during the daytime. Because productive end use involves activities to use power during the daytime. Most of the men either go fishing, they go hunting, or they go to the field, but women normally stays at the houses. So that's why I think it really puts a lot of we have to really put consciously emphasis to make sure that the appropriate programs is designed together with the women's group. So I think that is why nowadays when we do our projects, we have to have this socioeconomic empowerment program, and we have a specific program to really engage with the women's group in the community to have more effective productive end use. It's not that we don't want to work with the men to do other things. Like there have been good successful projects, for example, like boat making, blacksmithing during that time. But I think the most easiest and also manageable projects will be productive end use using is for agriculture produce processing, like making ginger powder, drying and all these things.
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Banie. I'm just digesting all that and also reading the questions from the audience. But those are excellent, tangible examples of why women need to be involved in the community hydro aspect. And if it's okay to share briefly on the role of women in watershed restoration activities. Yeah, if you've come across experiences.
Yeah, when it comes to watershed and also some of the work, I think the women role in some projects, a lot of the program that we do is enrichment planting, because we just want to reintroduce in some degraded areas. We try to reintroduce native species, tree species to that, or even plant fruit trees to that. So we normally work together with the women's group to set up a nursery, plants nursery, and we will buy those the saplings from them for the watershed enrichment planting. Those are some of the role that we have done with the women. The other thing is like a lot of the watershed resources is actually collected by women, mostly for weaving, like rattan, bamboo, and they also go to the nearby watershed. The micro hydro watershed normally is very near to the village because we always select the nearest river to the village, you see. So we realized that a lot of the resources, non-timber forest product, like like palm hearts, vegetables, are all collected within the watershed area. So that's why when we do the community mapping, we try to engage more and more time with the women to list down the type of biodiversity or the plants that they collect within that watershed area, and they have quite a very strong knowledge on plants and also even herbs that they normally go and collect in the watershed. So it's a good practice and also quite enriching in knowledge, because I never go to in depth with the names of those plants and so on, and how they even know how to use those plants for medicinal purposes and so on.
Yeah, yes, it sounds like they are both knowledge holders, but also they can earn income from, like you said, using the watershed, but in a sustainable way, the non-timber products and selling seedlings. So
that's why use and protect, the concept of use and protect among the indigenous communities are so important.
I think most of the questions coming, Banie has answered why we shouldn't leave a watershed undisturbed or natural, or I'm not fully understanding, Chisakula, both of your questions, but why shouldn't we leave watershed undisturbed and natural, zero human activity, versus use and protect? Why not just have protect? Is that,
You know why? A lot of the seed dispersion is actually from human activities, like collecting the fruits and then we normally after eating it you just throw it away. So it's actually one way of dispersion, but without without the interaction with humans in there, it's just the seed dispersion is very slow and very localized. But there are other scientific. I'm not a biologist in terms of that, but I just want to example of, for example, bamboo and rattan, which is two of the most used resources in my community. If we compare bamboo that's just growing wild compared to bamboo that we always collect for bamboo shoot and all, actually though that bamboo clumps that is being collected from time to time actually grows better and provides better bamboo quality compared to you just let it grow naturally, and eventually it will die if we don't prune it, and also from time to time clean up the area. So there are seasons where bamboo shoot coming out, and for indigenous communities, we only take the shoot that is good for us to. I mean, there are certain type of bamboo, and normally we don't take those like the straight bamboo one. We just let it grow, and if we take bamboo from time to time for building materials, in the clump is less dense, so it grows bigger, so more healthy because of the trimming. So there is effect in terms of human interaction on the resources that we take every day. Same thing with rattan. If we don't collect it, it will the whole clump will mature and die. So we have to actually collect it. If we collect it, if we don't finish it, the next shoot will grow faster and better. Actually, compared to if you don't collect anything, and it will slowly become smaller and smaller, and eventually it will die.
Yeah, thank you. Chisakula, your other question on what is the minimal activities? Yeah, this baseline process that we will explain in the module will help to answer. I mean, this is something that I struggle with, that every watershed and every community is different. So the need for this baseline assessment, Banie used a better word for it, but yeah, like, working with the women to write down everything they collect, how is the community using the resource? It all goes with that question, but we can also discuss that again during next week's live session. And then we have two questions that we can get to quickly. They are good at that. How has the main grid, they're all both related to the main grid. How has the encroachment of the main grid affected the mini grids, but also how has it affected the watershed conservation efforts?
Okay, there are two things. I think the grid connection or the grid reaching the community is one of the, the most discussed topic about the mini grid development. Many fear that if grid comes in, then it will die. I mean, the mini grid will basically die off. But in some cases, it can continue to exist and operated. For example, in Barrio, Barrio is one of the classic example where after the main grid reached, the community continues to utilize the microhydro mini grid for continuously, because the good thing about this is that we have put emphasis on establishing the productive end use. So we have a rice mill running off the microhydro mini grid. So when the mini grid, eventually the government grid came in, so the owner, the community owns the hydro, continue to operate rice mill using the microhydro mini grids. And in fact, they still run the system for as a backup, because sometimes there is outage from the main grid, because by the time it reached the kampung, because it's so far in the interior, the electricity is really unstable. So they found that the microhydro mini grid is actually much more stable than the government's grid because of the distance. Unfortunately, we have not been able to find ways to get this system to be connected to the main grid, even though it is already grid parity ready, but because of policy, we can't do that currently in Malaysia. So there are some example where eventually the micro mini grid also has to be decommissioned and dismantled because the operations and maintenance is just too high for them. In some cases, we have I've seen at least 2 of our projects that was established in 2005 eventually got decommissioned in 2018 after 13 years of operation. But yeah, mainly because there are not many people also in the village, so they're only elderly people. So yeah, nobody wants to continue, but or they just like decided, okay, this is too hard for them to manage, and they just decommission it anyway. And they sold the turbine to us, and we refurbish it for another project. So it's not a total loss, but we may still manage to do it. With regards to encroachment of watershed, I think the watershed is still important. It's not just for the micro hydro, because a lot of the the watershed that we do have also been used either for gravity feed system to the houses for drinking water and also irrigation. So even if the grid comes in and people are not paying attention anymore to the hydro, they still protect the watershed for the other reason, which is irrigation and also water supply.
Yeah, thank you very much, Banie. I could just keep listening and listening to your examples. It's really wonderful how you can bring in tangible anecdotes, and it helps the learning become easier. Yeah. So we have now a few minutes to show everyone the platform, but yeah, before doing that, we just want to thank you, Banie, for taking time to join us. We know you have many activities going on, and we're very, very grateful. I mean, yeah, and thank you to Nalori, who is here from Right Energy Partnership. Sometimes my brain doesn't work well enough, so she suggested Banie, and you are like the ideal voice for this topic. So thank you very much.
Yeah, that time we had a board meeting, and Narini was like, "Oh, everybody was wanting to meet me. Okay."
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, we will make this available to all of the students that are in the course, and also share in the public, because many of the messages you said need to be heard by the various external stakeholders. So, yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Yeah, so now we'll hand it over to Lara to explain how the e-platform works.
Sorry, just one moment here. I think we'll go straight to the platform. So everyone received an participant orientation note via email that explains some of this, but we just want to walk through to show you visually in case it's a bit easier to understand. So to get started, you'll go to seedlearning.org, and we so you'll log in with the email address with which you registered for the course, and everyone has been assigned a default password to start with, which is just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So starting again, you click this button in the top right, enter your email with which you registered, enter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and log in. And of course, it's good to reset that password to something secure that you'll remember. And so you do so by clicking the profile button in the top left here. And there you can enter your name as well as change your password. And click Save Changes once you've done so. And then on the left here, you see the icon for enrolled courses. So that's where you'll go to get started. It's loading a little slowly this morning, but here we go. So for now, you'll just see Module A, which if you are in our last course, you have already seen this, but this is for those who did not participate in that course, and to give an introduction to community scale hydropower. So there's an overview, and you can also see all of the module sections by clicking curriculum here. And you can navigate to each from this page, or you can click continue to get started. So it's a mixture of videos and supplementary materials down below. There's links. And once you've watched the video, you can click completed at the bottom here to track your progress. And that way at the end, we'll know who has gone through the whole course. If you'd like to receive a certificate of completion, that's important to register your progress. Okay, and you can also quickly navigate between sections by clicking this button up on the left here. So you can also refer back to the orientation note to refresh your memory on any of those details. And we just have one last quick logistical note. Sorry, it's loading slowly. Okay, so our last note is just about our questions and discussion tracker tool. There was a link to this also shared in the orientation note. So anyone can edit here and you can add your questions. We've organized it by category. So if you have questions around logistics, you can enter them there. And if you have questions around each module and each section, you can enter them as well. And we will respond as soon as we can. And some of the content related questions we'll also address in the Q&A session on Friday. And you can also respond to other participants. For instance, if you have experience or insight on a particular question, this can be a way to dialogue with each other. So
before we close, Lara, I just want to make a note on the last slide. So you'll actually see it says Module A, Orientation to Community Scale Hydro. In my overview of the course, I forgot to mention that the first module is actually going to be this orientation, so that before you dive into the watershed, hydro watershed topics, you actually get to know what, especially if you are new to the sector, you get a very good overview in this module. And for those who are continuing from the 6-week course, you wouldn't probably, I think the element in the platform, you may or may not see the module, but certainly you don't have to do it again. We can reconnect with you if that is the case in order to get your certificate. Yeah, we'll double check whether that's required or not. But just wanted to make this note that this is the first module that you'll see today. And then throughout the week, you'll see the other modules show up in the LMS, we call it LMS, Learning Management System. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think that's just about it. So we'd like to thank you, Banie, once again for coming and sharing your knowledge and insights today, and to all the participants for coming today. We will be sending a recording of the session around, as Dipti mentioned, and we look forward to being in touch throughout the week if questions come up. So thank you so much. Dipti, did we miss anything else?
No, I think it's perfect. Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Lara, very much.
Okay. Thank you. And with that, we'll close. So take care, everybody.